Where in the city will you find the Old House, the Round House and the Townhouse? And how did a Glaswegian get licked by millions of Russians? Find out now in this episode of Astonishing Glasgow. It's time to do a little bit more exploration of Pollokshaws. I was here in episode 14 where I showed you around the Vennel graveyard, and contrary to how it looks now, there is still a lot of history in this neighbourhood. I'm going to start this tour at the very south of Pollokshaws, and I'm very close to being in Thornley Bank. If you know the area, or look on a map, you will see that the word Auld House pops up a lot around about here. There's Auld House Road, Nether Auld House Road, Auld House Gardens, Auld House Burn, and Auld House Retail Park. The reason behind this can be found in Auld House Court. This is the Auld House, Auld meaning old in Scots. The Auld House has stood here since 1631, and it's the third oldest house in Glasgow after Provin's Lordship on the High Street and the Provan Hall in Easterhouse. Originally the home of a religious order, it is said that there are niches in the cellar walls where monks once slept, but it's now a private home, so there is no way I could get in to picture some of these. After the Reformation in Scotland, the house and the Auld House estate was purchased by the Maxwell family, who owned the Pollock estate. The Auld House estate was fully absorbed into the Pollock estate by 1647, but the house would go through several changes in ownership. Firstly in 1710, when printer and bookseller Robert Saunders owned the townhouse. Then in 1744, Glasgow lawyer John Waldrop lived here. After being owned by a paper manufacturer, the house eventually passed back into the ownership of the Maxwells, and for many years it acted as a children's home. In 1862, the historical notes of Eastwood Parish records that there were 2 chestnut trees here, one of which was the largest in the west of Scotland at 60 foot tall and 22 foot round, but sadly today there is no trace. By 1983, the house and the land surrounding it had become Auld House Court, a development of 24 flats that to me look like they were built from breeze blocks with no rendering, but I'm no architect, so what do I know? Time to move on before a resident calls the police on me. The next stop on our trail, half a mile away, is one of Pollokshaws' most famous landmarks, the Round House. If it's not the most famous, it's certainly the most past building, with its location right in the middle of the roundabout junction. The old toll house stands at number 1 Barhead Road and has survived on the same site since 1750. Built to charge a toll from traffic passing between Glasgow and Ayrshire, it also acted as a hostel for weary travellers. It was a particularly busy time around the Pollokshaws races, which was a horse race run along Barhead Road on the last Friday of each May, but by the 1830s and 1840s there was no racing going on, and it was said by a local minister to be an excuse for idle people to gather and to promote the sale of whisky. The tradition of the Pollokshaws race died out in 1883, but not before featuring in the poem The Queer Folk of the Shaws, written in 1818 by James Fisher. The poem tells the tale of a Glasgow lad who sets off to watch the races. In the first verse, it's all about the warning he gets from his mum, and it goes something like this. My mither tichly counselled me before that I gaed out, to tak good care and mind me eye wi' what I was aboot. She said ye may be trod to death beneath the horse's paws. And mind ye, lad, the saying's true, there's queer folks i' the Shaws. The toll house stopped collecting tolls in the 1880s, but was still used as a family home into the 1950s. It's obvious that the area around the house has gone through some huge changes, but thankfully the toll house survives. It's now Category B listed, and it was used for a while as a council storage yard, but now it only remains as a local landmark. While I try and safely cross all these roads without being flattened, now's a good time to ask you to hit that like button below if you're enjoying this video. Check out my channel for more like this, and hit the subscribe button to get a notification when the next video is uploaded. It's time for a short cycle along Shawbridge Street, a part of Pollokshaws that has gone through really radical changes in the past 150 years. Originally the heart of Pollokshaws, up until the 1950s, Shawbridge Street was lined with sandstone villas, tenements and cottages, but by the late 1960s, with a view to clearing the city of slum housing, the whole area was cleared to make way for 6 massive tower blocks and several smaller blocks of flats, known as the Shawbridge Corridor. At a time when building up was the future, almost all traces of Pollokshaws were removed. The high-rise dream didn't last long, and by 2016, every one of the towers had been demolished. I used to cycle through Pollokshaws a lot at this time and took many photographs of the progress. It amazes me that this pillar box has survived in the same location up to this day. The new blocks of low-rise flats look very nice, so it seems that shiny new Shawbridge Street is a nice place to live once again. But if you look very closely in the right place, you can still find a link to its historic past. This small patch of grass is known as the Shilling Ground. Although it's known for its mining, weaving and farming, the very reason there is a Pollokshaws in the first place is its location on the River Cart and the water-powered mill which stood on this site. And just across the road from the mill is the Shilling Ground. The Shilling Ground was provided for farmers to allow them to winnow their grain. By tossing it into the air, the wind would blow away all the chaff before leaving the good grain that was ready to be milled. Now the site of this historic monument to times past. No, not the phone box. There's a rather nice steel location finder with cutouts of the historic buildings of Pollokshaws. The only part of the mill to survive is the miller's house, which has been absorbed by the social club, but you can just make out its roofline if you look above. You can also get a good view of the weir that provided water for the mill from the road bridge, which incidentally is the Shaw Bridge that gave the area its name. There's also a good view of the weir from the terraced viewing veranda. But get here early, especially on a sunny day, to beat the crowds of sightseers that throng the overlook on warm days. I better move on, give some of the other people a chance to see the view and take some selfies and, Instagram it. Shinbone meets pedal in 3, 2, 1. We could head to the right and past the Vennel, but we explored that graveyard in episode 14, so we will go left. And don't be put off the sign, the crossing was working fine when I used it. This is a bit of old Pollokshaws which, after years of decay, will soon be gone. This is the Sir John Maxwell School, often called the Sir John Stirling Maxwell School, but the Sir John Stirling Maxwell was a pub in Shawlands. Sir John Stirling Maxwell was Sir John Maxwell's son. Built in 1906 to the design of John H. Hamilton, The school stands on land donated by Sir John Maxwell, he of Pollokshaws fame, and replaced the previous school that was built in 1854. Last occupied in 2011, by the time of its closing only one classroom was being used. The clearance of the Shawbridge tower blocks heavily reduced its local population, but I imagine with the new housing being built in Pollokshaws, its closure could now be seen as short-sighted on the part of the council. Though it was in a state of disrepair by 2011, it could have been saved, but 12 years of being left to rot with no maintenance whatsoever led to a roof collapse in 2021, and at the time of making this video in July 2023 they have started its demolition. It does look like they are preserving some of the dressed stone for future use, so watch out for any updates if I have them over on the Astonishing Glasgow Facebook and Instagram pages. The links are below. On with our tour, and we have reached the last of our Pollokshaws houses. We have seen the Auld house and the roundhouse, and this is the townhouse, or at least what's left of it. The townhouse was built in 1803 and was originally a meeting place for the community or common council of the town of Pollokshaws. In 1872, the building housed a school on the ground floor and a courtroom and police cell on the upper floor. It was also home to the local library, which allowed you to borrow a book for 2 hours every second Saturday, so you had to read quickly. In 1912, Pollokshaws was absorbed into the city of Glasgow, and the court was no longer needed. The school was not needed as the Sir John Stirling was now open, and the library had moved to 2 tenements on the main street, bequeathed by a Robert Campbell, so the townhouse was mostly unused. It did spend a short time as a pub, known as the Townhouse, but by 1934 the building was to be demolished. A public campaign managed to preserve the clock tower.
Save the clock tower!
And that's what remains today, but the rest is now history. Now, one last subject of this video, and it's at the back of the townhouse. This gleaming white granite monument stands in memory of John McLean. Not that John McLean. This John McLean was born in 1879 in a part of Pollokshaws that was demolished for the Shawbridge corridor. In 1900, he graduated as a teacher and taught at Strathbungo School in Craigie Street. In 1906, he formed the Pollokshaws branch of the SDF, the Social Democratic Foundation. The Social Democratic Federation was calling for social reform, and John would hand out the Pollokshaws Review newspaper on this very spot. In 1908, he began teaching classes in Marxist economics and organised a demonstration of unemployed workers through the Glasgow Stock Exchange. He led further strikes in 1910 of female workers of a Nielsen thread mill, and in 1911 with the striking workers at the Singer sewing machine factory in Clydebank. He was vigorously opposed to World War I, which brought confrontation with the police, and after he was found guilty of speeches that would prejudice army recruitment, his refusal to pay the £5 fine saw him jailed for 5 days, and he lost his teaching job. He was arrested again in 1916 and jailed for 3 years, but was released in 1917. His support for the Russian Revolution of 1917 saw him appointed as the Consul for Soviet Affairs in Great Britain, but his office was raided in 1918 by the authorities, and John McLean was sentenced to 5 years in Peterhead Prison for sedition. After release, he returned to Pollokshaws, and this is where this video goes full circle. He lived here at number 42 Auld House Road until he passed away from pneumonia on the 30th of November 1923. He was only 44 years old, and on the day of his funeral thousands of Clydeside workers gathered outside his house and marched alongside his coffin to Eastwood Cemetery where he was buried. He was so highly thought of that a silent march in his honour travelled from Eglinton Toll to to his grave on the first Sunday of December right up until 1947. The monument at the Townhouse was unveiled on the 2nd of December 1973, and in 1979, to mark what would have been his 100th birthday, the Russian government issued a commemorative postage stamp featuring our very own John McLean. An astonishing achievement for a boy from Pollokshaws. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please remember to hit those like and subscribe buttons if you did. If you would like to help me make more episodes, please hit that super thanks button to make a small donation. A huge thank you to those who have shown their support since the last episode, and a very special thank you to Mrs. Grant, the last headmistress of the Sir John Maxwell School. Thank you for all the pictures and information, and for adding a school mug to my Glasgow treasure collection. If you would like to get in touch, leave a comment below or head over to the Facebook and Instagram pages. The links are all below in the description. Thank you very much for watching, and see you all next time in Astonishing Glasgow. Right, I'm away to get my jaws around a fish supper. We're going to need to get a bigger belt. Bye now.